The singling out of one.
That's what it sounded like 2 weeks ago outside the gates of Auschwitz, where a far-right Polish member of the European Parliament, Grzegorz Braun, went on an anti-Semitic rant. He likened Jews to cannibals. He suggested Polish Jews are getting too much power because the country is considering a proposed new anti-Semitism strategy aimed at strengthening Jewish life there. Those vile comments prompted immediate condemnation from some top Polish lawmakers who are now thinking about charging him for inciting hatred. But his stunt that day, staged outside the very symbol of the destruction of Europe's Jews, which Braun has also said is fake, don't surprise Canadian-Polish historian Jan Grabowski. Grabowski is a professor at Ottawa U, and he's considered one of the world's leading experts in Poland and the Holocaust. For Grabowski, it's all also very personal. His father is a Polish Holocaust survivor who fought the Nazis during the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising in 1943. Grabowski's own research reveals Poland's complicity in the murder of Jews on Polish soil. His recent book, in English, entitled On Duty, documents how the so-called Polish Blue Police likely killed Jews, and mostly without much prompting from their Nazi overlords who occupied Poland after 1939. Poland has even sued Grabowski in court, attacking his research, although he would eventually win. It's been illegal in Poland since 2018 for people to lay any blame on the Poles for their role in the Holocaust. As the narrative goes, because Poland was under Nazi occupation, the Poles are victims too, and possibly just as much as Jews were. Grabowski's been carefully monitoring recent developments in Poland, including a spate of Holocaust denial flare-ups, like the one outside Auschwitz, flare-ups that have now strained relations between Poland and Israel and Poland and Germany. Grabowski believes the wider problem is Poland's long-standing refusal to come to terms with the truth about its own wartime past.
Whitewashing history is not a domain of the few in Poland. It's a sort of a national sport. If it were an Olympic competition, Poland would probably come up somewhere close to top, perhaps in a tight race with Turkey. I don't know.
I'm Ellen Dessner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Monday, December 8th, 2025. Welcome to North Star, the flagship news podcast of the Canadian Jewish News, made possible thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. Jan Grabowski had his own close-up and personal encounter with that far-right Polish politician Grzegorz Braun. It happened back in 2023 in Warsaw, where Grabowski was delivering a lecture at a symposium. Braun suddenly made a beeline for the podium, grabbed Grabowski's microphone, slammed it so that it broke, and then started smashing the loudspeakers. The lecture got canceled. The police had to be called. The politician's also taken a fire extinguisher to Parliament and put out a Hanukkah menorah lighting ceremony. Fast forward to November of this year, when things on the Holocaust denial front really started to heat up and create international headlines. We caught up with Professor Grabowski at his office in Ottawa to unpack what's at stake here in what he feels is dangerous Holocaust denial, now even intersecting with current anti-Israel hate after October 7th.
Well, good to see you again, and thank you very much, for having me here.
In the last few weeks, Poland and the Holocaust has been in the headlines. The issue of who is responsible for the murder of Poland's 3 million Jews. Let's break down for our audience the latest developments. First of all, starting with, was it the American ambassador to Poland, Thomas Rose, igniting this whole debate?
Tom Rose, who is the new U.S. ambassador and envoy to Poland, who previously was, I believe, CEO of Jerusalem Post, someone who should know history a bit, came out at this very unlikely forum, which was International Conference of Jewish Lawyers. He came out with this speech. I have no idea that an American diplomat could deliver a speech of this kind, basically refuting historical evidence or disregarding historical evidence of any kind of wrongdoings on the part of the Polish society during the Shoah. in basically a tone which said that Polish society took the high road, and completely dismissing any kind of massive, historical evidence that would argue to the contrary, engaging in something that we crass way in something that we call Holocaust distortion.
For too long, this nation has been burdened with the moral stain that was never its own. The slander that Poland somehow bears responsibility for the crimes committed by others. For decades, Poland has suffered a grave historic injustice. The persistent belief that Poland shares guilt for the barbaric crimes committed against it.
So this was the first salvo. Of course, politics is behind. There is a sense of American policymakers today playing it straight into the hands of nationalistic right, far right. This is their, let's say, preferred companionship, so to say. And this was clearly devoted to, or rather homage to these people.
So then what happened?
I mean, you talk about Yad Vashem. A couple of days later, there was a innocent tweet from Yad Vashem, which is a huge museum also, right? And center of Holocaust research, but also museum. What they do is they, from day to day, they sometimes tweet little pieces of history, what happened on that date 80 or 82 years ago. And they tweeted that, on 23rd of November, 1939, in Poland, Jews were branded, were forced to wear armbands indicating who they were. And innocent, statement, nothing wrong with it. And then huge fury in Poland, absolute fury in Poland, that Yad Vashem did not indicate that it was the Germans, that Poland was occupied. And actually, in the same tweet, Yad Vashem said in the next sentence that this was at the time issued by Hans Frank, that this was General Gouvernement, and so on and so forth. No, that was already a no-no. And this indignation, an Israeli ambassador in Warsaw was pulled in for a dress down, and Polish Prime Minister, Polish President, Polish Speaker of the House, all of them. I mean, this fury that Yad Vashem has to apologize, which is nothing to do with what Yad Vashem did. It has everything to do with Poland did not do. And Poland did not do the basic memorial work that it should have done over 3 generations ago. So these are the results of bad conscience now, because it's the same as my family asked for Stolpersteine in Krakow. We were told no. Why? Because they don't want any kinds of Jewish memory. The thing is, they told us we could perhaps put up some kind of Stolpersteine, not in this form, a different form, not in Polish, in English, and indicating clearly who killed our family.
Wait, just hang on a second. So I've been to Poland, I've been to Krakow, but it was a long time ago with the old March of Lenin. There's no Stolpersteine in Poland?
There are about 22 last count in few cities. Depends on local authorities, but all of it is rather running into hail of protests and official interdictions. So in Krakow, we're simply dismissed and thrown under the bus. And the idea was that it has to be in English, so the locals won't understand it probably, and it has to be clearly indicated that these Jews were not killed by the Poles, but they were killed by the Germans. So this is, Polish problem. I call it Polish illness.
Ever since October 7th, 2023, Muslim and Jewish communities in Canada have been torn apart.
I've known you for 20 years. You've been at my house for Shabbat supper, I don't know how many times. And for 1 second, you can't put down your friend and just hold my hand?
We're fed a constant stream of Jews and Muslims talking at each other, about each other, but rarely do we hear them talking to each other.
Why are you doing this? What's the benefit of doing this?
This podcast aims to do something different. I'm Avi Feingold, a rabbi and a writer with the Canadian Jewish News.
I'm Yafa Sakeja, a Canadian-Palestinian entrepreneur and volunteer with the Canadian Friends of Standing Together.
We're sitting down with Jews and Muslims, Israelis and Palestinians from coast to coast and across the political divide, having difficult conversations in good faith.
We are not the Israeli government. Palestinians are not Hamas.
This is the place where we're both supposed to end up, Israeli and Palestinian, Arab and Jewish.
Subscribe to In Good Faith, wherever you listen to podcasts.
One more thing. You have a very good German-Polish scholar. His name is Rosaliński Liebe, who publishes a 1,100-page long book, something, enormous in German, about the role of Polish mayors during the occupation, their implication in the Holocaust. And so 1,100 pages in German. Of course, no one reads it in Poland, right? And now suddenly you have Polish ambassador in Berlin requesting that Berlin conference talk of Grzegorz Rosoliński-Liebe be cancelled. Germans afraid they cancel this thing. It's Polish ambassador. And then, once again, Polish Minister of Foreign Affairs, Polish Prime Minister, Polish ministers protesting a book that they have never seen in their life.
So well, it's not only there. If our listeners will remember way back in September of 2023, you remember when we had a big scandal right before October 7th in Parliament, when the Canadian speaker invited a suspected Ukrainian Waffen SS, Yaroslav Hunka, and he got a standing ovation. And then the Polish ambassador went crazy and said Canada needs to apologize to the Poles for the insult. And then the speaker resigned. So it's the tentacles of this campaign are being felt here in Canada too.
There you go.
But go back to the gates of Auschwitz. Sure. The Polish government, the new Polish government, wants to introduce a anti-Semitism law for the next 5 years to try to wipe out current post-October 7th anti-Semitism. So how did a far-right politician respond and some of these horrible words that he said at the gates of Auschwitz?
The thing is that we are talking about a member of European Parliament, Grzegorz Braun, who is the leader of extreme right party, which is now drawing close to 10% of popular vote. Imagine 10%. And they are so far right that they hit through the wall and came on the other side, probably. So he is officially referring to Jews the way you don't want me to address it here. In any case, this is rampant raging anti-Semite. And the thing is that during last presidential elections last May, there were, something like 1.6 million Poles cast their votes for him, right? He is most likely to enter Polish parliament with his party in 2 years when they have elections over there. And he is, he simply hates the Jews, and he's quite open about it. There is nothing, nothing modern about it. He talks the language of fascists of 1930s and 40s. So he appears at the gates of Auschwitz. They don't let him inside, but so he holds outside his speech, and there are these, loyal people surrounding him, and he is not allowed inside. But the thing is, his words carry, right?
He basically just said, I'm not going to say horrible things, but basically there's no room in Poland for Jews, and Poland should be for the Poles.
But basically, his favorite tune is that Poland is a German condominium run by the Germans and the Jews. Okay, so this is this kind of rhetoric, and unfortunately, this thing finds traction with millions of people in the center of place where close to 5 million Jews have been murdered in between 39 and 45. So this is truly horrifying. And for me, it doesn't fall from blue sky. It's a result of very well thought through policies of Holocaust denial and distortion, which Polish state pursued over the last 70 years, which means the Germans are guilty, we are innocent. And the Germans are guilty, of course, but Poles are not innocent.
Now, where does this stand now politically? You mentioned there was politics behind it because they have a new Polish president vowing to oppose Holocaust scholars.
Oh, yeah.
But then, and I read get rid of the Hanukkah ceremonies. They invite Jewish leaders. But then the government's coming out with this anti-Semitism policy. So how did these two go on at the same time?
The problem is that you have the new president is as hard right as they come. He is with the severe criminal, let's say, accusations hanging over his head. He comes from a football fan rather milieu, so you can easily imagine the quality of intellect that goes together with it. Not that I have a problem with soccer, but with its fans, definitely yes. And what happens now? He is the person that actually during the presidential campaign mentioned me by name, calling me a false historian historian or a slanderer. So he is he knows his history, of course, his history very well. And this is one of his focal points. Attack on, let's say, dark parts of Polish history. This is where he will intervene in order to protect the ethos of national innocence. Now, what the current government does, which is, let's say, liberal democratic, let's say, slightly hanging on the right side, but Democrats nevertheless, they hate to engage in so-called identity politics. They are afraid of it. They know that they will lose with the right wing because you cannot fight this war and on this ground with the right wing. So this anti-Semitism strategy was percolating through the Ministry of Justice and two other ministries. I sort of regarded it from afar for over a year and a half. Some of my friends were involved in trying to push this dossier. It was extremely hard labor. But the thing is that European Union insists. I mean, if you are a member of the club, which is a fairly, I would say, elite club of nations of European Union, this is one of the musts of the requirements. So I would say under pressure from Brussels, this thing is going through. Whether it will go through or not, in what form, it remains to be seen. But it's definitely not something that the government considered its priority. It's the last thing, actually, they would like to do.
It's supposed to be adopted or come out soon in December, so we'll have to watch for that. And it's very timely.
I'm not certain it will come to vote even. We'll see, but it definitely it will be one of the points of contention.
When we spoke 2.5 years ago, you mentioned that this campaign from the far right was also being felt in Wikipedia and in online posts about the Holocaust. And you and a colleague had a paper, which we reported about, where they were sending really emails. And I even got some after our interview was published, nasty emails from Polish activists and Canadian activists describing our work as false, attacking me for even having you on. It was quite disturbing, actually, on Twitter and on direct emails from these people. But how has that changed since October 7th? Is that and continuing on, I've read that there's been some kind of editors that have courageously pushed back. But where does that stand now?
Well, the problem is that the phenomenon is now not almost certainly, if you look at the post-October 7 phenomena, we are in a new and somewhat uncharted territory. What you have is now an alliance of sorts, targeting everything Jewish without distinction as to political views. It's arguing that you are a voter of Israeli Communist Party is not going to take you off the hook. The problem is that you are Jewish, and this problem, as I said, is being now shared by people of right-wing persuasion and left-wing persuasion, and I hate to say it, also some of the center people. So this is a dramatic revival on the one hand of all these tropes we have been fighting with. I would say it's the old story, never again, doesn't hold much ground or water in today's world. As I thought that in Poland, before you cast a stone on things Jewish and Israeli, you think twice, because that's where practically all European Jews have been murdered and people are walking on a blood-soaked land. It let's say, imposes certain restrictions. It doesn't. No, and not any longer. I have people, previously my friends, who are signing extraordinary, harmful, and hurtful documents, open letters, which basically compare the treatment, the war in Gaza to the Holocaust. So this abuse of distortion, denial, abuse of the history of the Holocaust has become a domain not only of right wing, something which we are used to, but also of left wing academia, journalists beyond. I mean, here you can tell more than I can do, but the scale of the phenomenon caught me by surprise, I must say, and transformed, this continent and Western Europe into places where Jews have to be vigilant in order to not to get hurt.
You had when we spoke 2.5 years ago, a credible death threat, speaking of which, against you. And I know you were going that day to the Ottawa police. Whatever happened with that? And what is the situation now for you and your family?
Well, yeah, in Poland, I just received now a long list of accusations from journalist who is working. Let's not go any further, but investigative journalist who he suggests implies that what I do is that I am a Russian spy because
They don't pay you enough, obviously.
well, then unfortunately, I must ask for a raise probably. But the thing, I'm so busy working for the Israeli intelligence, I have no time to work for the Russians. Jokes aside, this thing goes on and on. It's constantly being updated. So my visit to Ottawa police was very fruitful because actually the officer taking my report was my student from 15 or 20 years ago. In any case, they opened the file, they did investigation, and I hit a wall because these people hide behind in jurisdictions which are off limits to any kind of investigative efforts coming from here. And this was in one of these jurisdictions. But I'm getting it's from time to time same letters, but as long as they are not specific, as they don't specify my address, namely, then I just tend to disregard them. However, general situation is so bad that my friend, whom I mentioned, this young historian in Germany who wrote the book in German, he had to report now the whole dozens of these letters, mails to German police. So it's pretty bad.
Last year, you had 2 books out. One was a scholarly article, and one was the book that came out published by Yad Vashem, actually.
They were on duty, and it's actually a thick book here. And the second one, as you mentioned, is a small book which was published in Toronto by University of Toronto Press last August. It's called Whitewash Poland and the Jews. So this is rather a polemic book, essay easy to read and quick to read, and this one is a heavy brick.
First of all, what is the reaction from Poland, where you talk about the complicity of the Polish Blue Police and others?
I tend to be now completely passed by in silence. In other words, regarding the problem is that Holocaust distortion, meaning we were innocent, is something that is a shared value, if you will, among, as I mentioned, from far left to far right in Poland. There is practically no room for any kind of disaccord here or, let's say, exposure of past problems. So the Polish edition of this book, published 5 years ago, sold well and generated some discussion, I would say. But the Whitewash, which I think was the book that I poured my heart out in, so to say, about all these wrongs, this book was drowned in silence in Poland.
Do you think that Jewish organizations such as March of the Living, Birthright, etc., should boycott going to these trips or Holocaust roots trips in Poland as long as this continues?
Yeah, they had some, Israeli government was subsidizing actually trips for Israeli youth age 17 or so.
Yeah.
And they visited death camps and so on and so forth. Polish authorities were for a decade at least very unhappy because these students never mingled with the locals. They didn't go beyond the Holocaust memorial trip description. In Poland, the idea was if we agree, we have to force the Jews to look at something more, to look at accomplishments of today's Polish society, develop strong links to, and so on and so forth. And now, 2 years ago or 2.5 years ago, there was an accord between Israeli government and Polish government about these trips, about trips of Israeli youth, and the Polish government simply rolled out their wish list, which the Israelis accepted. And on that wish list, for instance, was that if you go to Auschwitz, you should also visit one of these museums. And on these museums list, the wish list of Polish authorities, there were 3 museums and this made me very, very, very upset. There were 3 museums of so-called forsaken or doomed soldiers, which are Polish soldiers who continued to fight the communists after the war. And the problem is that some of them were deeply involved in murdering the Jews because for them, Jews and communists were just the same, one and the same, right? And so if you have Jewish youths going to appreciate the deeds of forsaken soldiers, that's a bit much, I would say. As my uncle, who was murdered by these forsaken soldiers in April of 1946 when he returned from hiding, right? So I believe these trips are good. These trips are good, but the people going on these trips have to be informed very precisely what kind of a memorial battlefield they are venturing into. And they are young people, so it's a problem, of course, because they are perhaps not knowledgeable, not enough, or they don't simply have enough material. But this is something essential before they leave Israel. And also, the Poles insisted on their guides, not Israel.
They're reminders. They're reminders.
So it is not an innocent game. This is, the problem is that Polish authorities succeeded in Poland in basically turning history on its head, because if you, as something that I quote often, you have a poll from 2 years ago stating that 71% of Poles is convinced that their nation suffered equally or more than the Jews during the war. I mean, if you wanted any kind of argument, it works. It does. Lying works. So it's actually quite an important time, because my discipline, the study of the Holocaust, is under direct attack. Not in Eastern Europe, it's here in Canada. Politicians are becoming wary of the word Holocaust because, of course, they fear backlash on the part of people who don't appreciate anything Jewish, even the Holocaust. So there will be, it is nowadays, I would say, the defense of the Holocaust is history of the Holocaust is very, very important, because the denial of it has become a universal problem.
And you live in a city where currently, as our listeners know and have been following, the person who pleaded guilty to defacing the National Holocaust Memorial Monument, not too far from your
Right.
university, said it wasn't. Yeah, it said it wasn't an act of anti-Semitism. It was, to call attention to what Israel and Canada should be doing about Gaza.
Right. The thing is that here in Ottawa, Jews are afraid to wear yarmulkes, right? Openly. It is something that 10 years ago would have been completely impossible to fathom, to imagine.
Right. Well, we'll watch and see what happens in Poland in the next few weeks with whether the anti-Semitism law comes back into the headlines and whether Yad Vashem sort of backs down, which we should just clarify. It kind of did
What did he do?
with the tweet that
Right.
they mentioned about, they did say that afterwards. They clarified their statement, which
Okay, I didn't know that.
right. So they were like, you see, we did say the word occupied by the Germans, that we weren't.
I believe that the time has come not to apologize, to stand firm. And this is what I would advise also Yad Vashem. If other people have problems with their mental health, then let them deal with these problems. And do not accept it as a point of reference, right? As a frame of reference. So this is what happens in Poland, is simply a problem of people who forgot on purpose to do memorial work they should have done a long time ago. And these blow-ups are the result of this unfortunate illness.
We thank you for the important and incredible work you're doing. And we thank you for coming to the Canadian Jewish News' North Star podcast.
I am delighted to be with you here, and thank you very much for inviting me.
And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of North Star, made possible thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. To learn more about Grabowski's latest books, go to the links in our show notes. North Star is produced by Zachary Judah Kaufman and Andrea Varsany, while Michael Freeman is our executive producer, and our theme was composed by Brett Higgins. Thanks for listening.